To get us kick-started on our week of extreme theory, extreme policy, and extreme temperatures, I'm going to announce our first speaker. Dr. Guido Hülsmann is a professor of economics at the University of Angers in France. He is the author of A Critique of the Theory of Dominant Economies, The Logic of Currency Competition, both in German, The Ethics of Money Production, and Deflation and Liberty. He is the author of numerous academic journal articles and is a regular contributor to the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics. Most importantly for our purposes here tonight, he is the author of the monumental book, Mises, The Last Night of Liberalism. At well over 1,000 pages in length, it is a remarkable intellectual biography of a most remarkable intellectual. Comprehensive, penetrating, and beautifully written. I consider it one of the most important books you can get your hands on. His lecture tonight is The Life and Work of Ludwig von Mises, and I give you Dr. Guido Hülsmann.
You understand me? Okay. Otherwise, I can shout. We Germans can shout. Which brings me to my first point. The life and work of Ludwig von Mises. I don't know whether you have looked at the schedule, but I'm supposed to talk for 45 minutes. I mean, it's like inviting somebody to talk about astrophysics in 45 minutes. Biology and chemistry, 45 minutes. That's why they bring in the Germans to handle this thing, right? So 3 weeks ago I was in London. I gave a talk on the present Austrian perspective on the present crisis, and I had 20 minutes. Okay, so you'll get my 45-minute version. Maybe I'll overdraw because the other ones have been so efficient. We are Germanizing them, so I'm ahead of time. So you get my 45 or 1 hour version of the life and work of Ludwig von Mises. The reason why we talk about Mises is, because he's the named patron of the Mises Institute. We don't do exegetical work during this week, so we won't go through Mises' writings and discuss what he meant and what he might not have meant and so on. Does not mean that we wouldn't do this at all, would refuse to do this, but that's not the point of the Mises Summer University. The point is to convey to you Austrian economics as it is taught today by Austrian economists teaching today. And of course this means it's not exactly word for word the same thing as what you would find in Mises. For us, what unites us is the conviction that Mises and his predecessors Karl Menger and Eugen von Boehm-bawerk have laid the most useful foundation to do social analysis in our day. And that's why we here have a common starting point. Then everybody goes a little bit his way, so deviates from Mises in various ways. So when I deviate, it's of course always right. When Walter Block deviates, it tends to be wrong. But they invite him nevertheless. So our plan for today is then to talk about the life stations of Mises and their major works. So we'll first go through his family background, and talk a little bit about his education. Then I'll lead you through the different stations of his professional life, and then we'll talk about some of his major works. As far as readings are concerned for this lecture, to back this up and to go into more detail, I recommend the 2 most important books have been written by Mises himself. The first one is his book Memoirs, which has recently been re-edited. So in this year, in a new edition, is this book that you see on the left-hand side, in the upper left-hand side, Memoirs. And the second book in the middle, in the top line on the middle, is the historical setting of the Austrian school, in which Mises explains the historical significance of the Austrian school. And the third book that you see here is, oh, wait a minute, this is, somehow this screwed it up, right? Yeah. Yeah, they gave me on my computer that I have here, they gave me open something software, so I didn't have Microsoft. software, so I was lost. Yeah, so this is what happens. Okay, we will see what else gets screwed up. So now we have two lines, right? So Memoirs is in the upper left corner, then we have the historical setting, and then a book by Margit von Mises, My Years with Ludwig von Mises, which is very different from the other books because it's not the interest not to convey his intellectual development at all. She doesn't touch on this, but to present Mises as the man, which is very interesting. Because he was very standoffish and wouldn't get into personal things, and she portrays the man that he was. It's very interesting. And as far as biographical work so not autobiographical, but biographical work from outside of the Mises family is concerned, so we have especially Murray Rothbard, who has written two brilliant introductions to Mises the man and Mises' work. One is The Essential von Mises, and the other book is a booklet, it's about 60 pages in print, is Scholar, Creator, Hero, which the title already expresses Rothbard's great admiration for Mises. And both of these texts have been edited in a single volume, which you see on the lower row to the left, The Essential von Mises. It's come out this year too, I believe. Then there's a text by Israel Kirzner, also on Ludwig von Mises. Israel Kirzner was one of Mises' most important students at New York University. And he is still alive. Yes, but he was a student. And the third one is the book that Mark was kind enough to mention that I wrote. And it's true, it's very thick, so it's very different from the other ones because it goes into detail that are not necessarily of interest for everybody. So if you want to have a concise introduction, you better buy the Rothbard books or read the Kirzner text, which is intermediate. And if you want to have the sturdy German stuff, which is so thick, which you can also use as a defense weapon or assault, you buy my book. Okay, let's start off. So with the live stations. Okay, well, somehow these photos have disappeared. Well, okay, so you'll do without photos, without pictures. So the starting point is Meyer Rackmehl von Mises, who was Mises' great-grandfather and was an industrialist and banker in the town of Lemberg in Austria, Hungary, which is a European, was a European country, had been a European country because it vanished in 1918 at the end of World War I. It had been the second largest country within Europe, second only to Russia, larger than France, larger than the German Empire, larger than Sweden, etc., etc. A country that combined Germans, so various nationalities, about 10 or 11 nationalities, Germans, Czechs, Hungarians, Italians, Romanians, and so on and so on. Don't want to exclude anybody. Ukrainians, Jews. And also, so Jews are not only an ethnic group, but also a religious group. So there are different religions. We had Catholics, Jews, Protestants, even Muslims, and so various other versions of Christian faith in this country, which was therefore, which is for this reason very interesting for present-day scholars because they see here a kind of a role model for how to organize a multicultural state. It was definitely a multicultural state, but it had a much much smaller state than present multicultural countries. So Mises was born in the one of the easternmost parts of the country, in Galicia, which today belongs to the Ukraine, and for a long time had belonged to Poland. His native city, Lemberg, or today called Lviv, and the Poles, I believe, call it Lvov. Is this correct? Listen to this man, Lvov. This was the capital city of this area, which mainly combines so the Ukrainians, Poles, Germans, The largest religious groups were Catholics and Jews, and the Jews were dominant in the city of Lemberg. So it was about 50% of the city of Lemberg. So Meyer Rackmehl von Mises' great-grandfather, was in honor of his various accomplishments ennobled in 1881, the year of Ludwig's birth. And he was ennobled before Ludwig was born, so Ludwig was the first family member being born a nobleman. Therefore, his name is Ludwig von Mises. Mises' father was Arthur von Mises, a railroad engineer, and Adele von Mises, who was a sign of a commercial family also in Galicia. So they both resided in Lemberg and moved eventually to Vienna, the capital city, because railroads in those days were nationalized. So there was different waves. There was nationalization, then they were reprivatized, nationalized again. So the second wave of nationalization occurred when the government had again money to spend. The privatization occurred when the government was out of money, so it tends to be a good period in the history of a country. So I'm not really sure whether we would wish for our governments to get rid of their financial problems. It's a very nice thing. If they have a lot of financial problems, they tend to do less nonsense. So when they had money again, they re-nationalized the railways, and so it became necessary for Ludwig's father to move from the operational center, which was in Lemberg, to Vienna, which was quite removed from the railway line that he had to manage, that he had to administer. So this seems to be not very sensical, right? Because it doesn't make sense to manage a business from afar, but that is government. What do you want? So that's how they do it. Mises had two brothers, Richard, who became a famous mathematician and physicist. Those of you who have studied economics or other social sciences, you had a statistics class, you probably have been taught the relative frequency theory of probability. So this is a theory that goes back to Richard von Mises. And his thesis, his theories are still fundamental for aviation theory and various other disciplines, thermodynamics. He's a very important thinker, just as Ludwig has been a very important thinker in economics, but nobody outside of the Austrian school has realized it so far. So we're helping out. And he had a third brother, Karl. Karl died when Ludwig was about 12 years old, and he died of scarlet fever. The family so moved to Vienna, and Ludwig got his main education in Vienna, went to a gymnasium. We would translate this into high school in current English, but it wouldn't convey you the right image of a gymnasium. Just to give you one figure that says it all, a gymnasium reunited 5% of an age cohort, or less than 5% actually. And so whereas a high school, virtually everybody goes to a high school today. So to a gymnasium, you have less than 5%. So these were, of course, as a tendency, the children from affluent families. But that alone was not sufficient. You had to be somewhat smart as well. At least otherwise you wouldn't be able to go through the program, which was very rigorous, and which, especially in the higher years, 10th grade, 11th grade, and so on, resembles more master program of today than high school program. So university master program. Then Ludwig started the university in 1900. I'm very happy at least one picture works. This is so a picture, the current day picture of the University of Vienna, the main building, which is also the building where Mises was taught. And so he studied government science, Staatswissenschaften. Government science, which included especially history, lots of law. And then you had the possibility to specialize. And the specialization could occur, among other things, in economics. So that's what he did. So he followed the economics classes right from the beginning and specialized ever more so as he went on. Now, let's see what else we can get here. I'm afraid this is really a disaster, right? So I had so many nice pictures, yeah. But it's all due to this bad software. Yeah, well, anyway. So he studied there 4 years, interrupted by 1 year of military service. The first 2 years, his main professor was a man called Karl Grünberg. And Grünberg was a member of the historical school, about which you will learn more today, but which I will just say that was some sort of the main principal antagonist of the Austrian school. So whereas the Austrian school at the notion that economic theory was important because it described those aspects of reality that had a universal significance, universal validity, whereas history was also important, but it analyzed those aspects that had only contingent importance, so were true for particular times in particular places, whereas economics, social theory in general focuses on universals. The historical school believed that there was no such thing as a universal. There's no such thing as a fact that holds true at all times in all places, and there are no causal relationships that hold true at all times in all places. So pretty much you've got to look at each situation separately and identify the laws. There are no true laws, but the contingent relationships that could be observed in that period. And so price formation on the Côte d'Azur today works differently than in Galicia in 1900, and it works different in New York City today than in Boston in 1980, and so on. Whereas the Austrian school, of course, along, by the way, with most other economists, holds that price theory holds true at all places and all times. So Grünberg was a member of this historical school. The historical school was kind of the fashionable school in those days, in the German countries in particular, and it was sweeping over into Austria. And Grünberg was heading this invasion of the Austrian school, spearheading this invasion of the historical school into Austria. So he was appointed to this very prestigious chair at the University of Vienna and had Mises in his seminar. Mises was some sort of a star student. After 2 years of study, he produced a monograph on the relationships between lords and landlords and peasants in his native Galicia, and was published in a prestigious series. Then Mises went off to do his military service, became a lieutenant. It was the typical career of university graduates in those days. And when he returned, several things happened that were very important for his further development. First of all, he started working with another professor, with Filipovic, Eugen von Filipovic, who was not a member of the historical school. He was somebody who had been trained by Karl Menger, so was a student of Karl Menger's. What set him apart from Mises, as compared especially to Mises' later development, was the fact that Filipovic was the foremost representative of interventionism in those days. So if you wish, he was kind of a mixture between Milton Friedman and Paul Krugman. Okay? Very prominent, very well known in all the German-speaking world, and because at the time, of course, all major American economists got their PhD in Germany, he was known all over the world. Therefore, I compare him to Milton Friedman, Paul Krugman. And he was very, very well known, very articulate, very smart person, a great professor. Although I don't know whether Krugman is a great professor, I don't know that. But, he's articulate and well known. And he was an interventionist. Definitely, Paul Krugman is an interventionist. So Filipovic was one as well. And so here Mises learned firsthand all the arguments that are commonly adduced to make the case for various forms of government interventionism. And most of all, Mises got in touch with the Austrian school. At about Christmas 1903, he got a copy of Karl Menger's Principles of Economics into his hands, and Karl Menger is the founding father of the Austrian school. And so Mises, for the first time, realized that there was such a thing as universally valid economic theory that was a true theory that stands up to realistic criteria, that it is not just a fiction, an amalgamation of fictitious hypotheses, but a more or less accurate description of those aspects of human action that can be generalized, that hold universally true. 2 years later, then, Mises graduated. He got a PhD in early 1906. In those days, in Vienna, you got the PhD not by writing a dissertation, but it was at the end of the basis of an oral exam. Okay, so it was a little much tougher than the oral exam that we will have at the end of the week. So don't ask us for a PhD or something, or for an Austrian PhD, right? But that was the way it was handled at the time. And so essentially he was examined on law, history, and economics. So these were the fields in which he was examined. And then he joined the graduate seminar of Eugen von boehm-bawerk. Boehm-bawerk was the most important pupil of Karl Menger's, and the author of the most influential, internationally, the most influential Austrian book in those days, which is his magnum opus, his major work on capital and interest, which was translated very early into English and also into French, and gained him an international reputation. Boehm-bawerk had various talents, was also very talented as an administrator, so he was a 4-time Minister of Finance in Austria. When boehm-bawerk retired from his assignments as a Minister of Finance, from his last assignment as a Minister of Finance, he asked that a new chair be created for him in political economy at the University of Vienna. So here again, a tradition that is also upheld in our days, right? Very often politicians with interest in intellectual things, academic affairs and so on, they get appointed to sometimes endowed chairs that are especially created for them. So it's the same thing at the time with boehm-bawerk. And he started teaching a seminar, a research seminar at the University of Vienna. And so would participate not only current students, but also former students, old graduates, even those who had already gotten their PhD. And Mises was one of them. And during those years, it was from 1905 through 1914, Mises attended this seminar, which brought together a very high-level group with two major components. On the one hand were the science of the Austrian school, so Mises himself, but then also some of his friends like Richard von Striegel. And on the other hand, a group of Austro-Marxists. Marxism at the time was a fashionable doctrine too, especially within the labor movement. And so you had some of the smartest young men, imbued with the ideals of social democracy and socialism. And they belonged so to the Marxist schools. And they also joined the seminar of boehm-bawerk, among other things, in order to refute the old master. So they had very interesting discussions, as we can imagine. Mises, during those years, then prepared his first major book, The Theory of Money, about which I will say more a little later. So let's turn now to his professional life. So here you see too, everything is screwed up. And I plan to have this pop up at different points of time. You see here, so from 1906 to 1909, he started off a little bit wavering. He started off with a career choice in fiscal administration, which was the number one entry into professional life for young graduates from government science in those days. So it brought you right, it was the golden way to the top of Austrian civil service, also to Austrian politics and so on. So it's like coming from the Kennedy School of Government into whatever, the State Department or something. Right? So it was a very prestigious thing. But he didn't like it because it was too bureaucratic. Right? There's a famous passage in his book, Bureaucracy, in which he explains that this is unbearable for somebody who is dynamic and wants to go his own way, who is creative, wants to change things and so on. If you're in a bureaucracy, you're just a little wheel in a huge machine which you cannot control. So it was very unsatisfactory. He quit service very quickly and joined a law firm in Vienna, which completed his training as a lawyer, which was one good thing, but it was still too bureaucratic because these lawyers, this firm in particular, dealt with public affairs, and so they were constantly in touch with public administrations, so they still were in the wheels of bureaucracy. Then he joined the Chamber of Commerce, and this was, as he would later say, the very happy moment in his life. He didn't realize it at first, but he would make a very good career at the Chamber of Commerce, and it would give him a voice and a prominence in the country, which he would not could have obtained otherwise. So we can here distinguish two major phases. You see it from 1909 to 1914, and then from 1918 to 1934, two excursions in the chapters in the Chamber of Commerce, interrupted by World War I. During the first 5 years, he was what was called a consultant. So essentially, he was writing reports on various policy-relevant issues, right, from tobacco regulation to meat market regulation and so on. Right, these were the topics. So, which is very interesting because Mises, of course, gained later on a reputation as a theorist, and one of Mises' very controversial claims was that there is something like pure economic theory that is a priori theory, which does not depend on any observations that we make. I will come back on this later too. So it's easy to jump from this fact to the idea that somehow Mises was not interested in the real world, was a pure theoretician. But the interesting thing is that all of his life he has always worked in very close touch with real world problems. And he actually started off as a disciple of the historical school and started off analyzing real world problems. And despite of this, or precisely because he knew practical work so well, he knew, well, there are certain principles that hold true, that we apply in such work, and which we do not infer, and which we cannot validate nor refute by reference to observations that we make. Very good. So, 1914 to 1918, he was an officer in World War I, started off as a lieutenant, was promoted to captain, was kind of a miracle that he survived because he spent quite, 2 or 3 years at the front. Very dire circumstances often, but he made it. From 1934 to 1940, he was a visiting professor at the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. He left Austria in those days because of the political situation. There was a rise of the Austrian Nazi Party. And Mises felt, so that things were becoming increasingly unpleasant. There was lots of fighting going on the streets, deaths and so on, murder. And Mises must have feared that the Nazis would take over Austria, just as 1 year before they had taken over Germany. So he accepted a visiting professorship, also because he was he qualified already for early retirement at the Chamber of Commerce. He was very happy to do this. It was a 1-year position which was renewed 5 times. Then he emigrated at the beginning of World War II to the United States and found a stipend, one has to say, at NBER. So he was a fellow of the National Bureau of Economic Research. The stipend was not paid by NBER, it was paid by the Rockefeller Foundation. And Mises had a very long-term association with the Rockefeller Foundation from his Vienna days. So starting in the 1920s, he had been one of their academic contacts in Vienna. And he wrote lots of letters of recommendation for various students, selecting people who would go to the United States, study at Harvard and other places. So when he came to the US, then nobody was waiting for him then. Right? So therefore he worked for about, a quarter of the salary that he had in Geneva. It was a dramatic cut, but he had fled from Europe had to take what he could get. Starting in 1943, then he got other supporters in the National Association of Manufacturers, NAM, so he got an additional source of revenue. And then in 1945, he started becoming a visiting professor at NYU, and he remained a visiting professor during 24 years. It was a very long visit. So here, you must imagine this is full of pictures, very nice pictures. Yeah, so I'm clicking, I have really many pictures, 7, 8. So we get to major works. Okay, so in order to understand the work of a thinker, one has to, of course, explain a little bit, at least, the background. And the background is given, in Mises' case, by the evolution of economic thought from the classical economists to Karl Menger, to the Austrian school. Okay, so this was also pictures here, 3 pictures. Classical economics is the school of economics that starts with Adam Smith. He's the author of a book with the title An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And Smith reacts with this book against a dominant view at the time. And I always explain this dominant view because it's also the dominant view of our times. So it has not gone away, it has come back. So according to this dominant view, what drives the economy and what makes for growth is monetary spending. The more money you spend, the better it is for the economy. Reminds you of something. So, if necessary, then of course it was a civic duty of the government to go into debt also to spend more, and aristocrats had a duty to be heavily in debt, to spend a lot. And the more you spend, especially on consumer goods, the more you promoted economic activity. Spend, spend, spend. In those days, of course, the economies were based on a metallic money, so the only way to increase your spending was to bring more money, more gold and more silver into your country. The only way to do this was by depriving other countries of that share of gold and silver. So it was kind of a zero-sum game. You enrich yourself, but you impoverish the other guys. And so from this mercantilist theory resulted a conflictual worldview. Only could enrich one nation, but only one nation at a time, not all nations at the same time. So Adam Smith comes up and he completely rejects this, and he presents a coherent counter-program, counter-analysis, which has won economics, the economics profession, during the 19th century. What Smith explained was that monetary spending has nothing to do with economic growth and with the wealth of the nation. And stated in today's terms, I mean, Smith didn't quite say it that way, stated in today's terms, the reason is simply that what makes for a flourishing economy are flourishing companies, and flourishing companies are characterized by higher selling receipts than costs. Okay? Our selling receipts can be higher than cost at whatever price level. And if the price level is double, then the prices that we have actually, and if your costs are also double, you're not better off. On the other hand, if the price level is half of what we have right now, and your costs are also half of what they are right now, you're in exactly the same position. Right? So you see, the price level per se is without importance for the operation of an economy. What is important are the relations that exist between different prices, between different spending streams. So this Adam Smith realized. He said, well, the true causes of economic growth are savings and the division of labor. We'll talk about this during the week. And from this point of view, then, it was clear, it resulted a harmonious view of the world because it was possible for all nations to become rich at the same time. Therefore, the book was called Inquiry into the Causes and Nature of the Wealth of Nations, plural. And if one nation saved, it enriched itself. but it enriched also all other nations because it could produce more, so sell more goods at lower prices to other nations, which thereby profited too. So this was the starting point of classical economics. Classical economics is the school of Adam Smith. People who had accepted his critique of mercantilist theories and based their own thinking about the economy on the premises established by Smith. But Smith, of course, as every thinker, he had left various black areas that he did not fully enlighten. And these were then the areas where subsequent thinkers tried to improve on his thinking. And one of them was Karl Menger, the founder of the Austrian school. One area where Smith was very bad was price theory. Adam Smith did not explain precisely why capital would be allocated in one company or in one investment project rather than in another. He allocated from an aggregate point of view, said, well, we only have so and so much capital, so it must go either there or there. If we put more capital in this area, then it's not available otherwise. Okay, that was his main point, and that point is correct. But he did not explain why is it that the capital was invested in that project or in this company rather than in the other one. In order to do this, you need to be able to explain prices, because it's prices, the difference between selling prices and buying prices, between revenue and cost expenditure, that motivates investment decisions. So in order to give such an explanation, you need a good price theory. The price theory of Adam Smith was very bad. Right? So he argued that prices resulted from cost of production. Tomorrow you will learn in more detail why this is a very unsatisfactory approach. So Karl Menger proposed a different solution, namely the solution of subjective value. Prices result from subjective evaluations of individuals. Individuals evaluate money as compared to apples, projectors, microphones, and so on, even if they are very low quality. And so from this evaluation process result then market prices for consumer goods, which are the starting point for the formation of market prices for producer goods, and so on. So one deficiency in Smith's system was alleviated. Another deficiency was the lack of a capital theory. Adam Smith did not have a good capital theory, especially he neglected the time dimension of the investment of capital. This was addressed by another Austrian economist, Eugen von Boehm-bawerk, whom I already mentioned, and so on. Now, by the time Mises started his studies and started especially his research, the most neglected area within Austrian economics, within this new approach to economic reasoning, had been money. Adam Smith had neglected analysis in terms of spending, in terms of monetary prices, because, as we have said, he considered that monetary spending and the price level was completely irrelevant for economic growth, which was the main for wealth, right, for the wealth of nation. Therefore, he neglected money in his reasoning. And all classical economists, and even into the generation of Karl Menger, followed him in this attitude. So they neglected anything that had to do with money. In fact, during the 19th century, economics was taught in two classes. One was the class dealing with wealth and the distribution, so the creation of wealth, the distribution of wealth, the consumption of wealth, all important things. And then you had another class that dealt with money and banking and crises, right? Because even at the time, people realized that economic crisis had an origin in the financial and the banking sector. But they were not brought together. And what Mises did in his first book, it works, was to bring this together. So his first book was the 1912 Theory of Money and Credit, Theorie des Geldes und der Umlaufsmittel, that is the German title. And here Mises made, several contributions. I've just selected for you the four most important ones. Mises refined the Austrian theory of value. He didn't put much stress on this. He didn't wave a little flag and say, hey, I'm now going beyond Karl Menger, but he did, in fact, because Mises, much more so than Karl Menger, rooted value theory in human choice. Something was an aspect of decision-making, and stressed that values were always necessarily relative, and this relation between the values of different goods result precisely from the fact that human beings make choices. If I could go to the bakery and I buy my bread for $1, there is a value relationship between the bread and the dollar. The dollar is for me less important than the bread, and for the baker, the dollar is more important than the bread. And therefore, the exchange takes place. So the two goods are in a value relationship precisely because there is choice. Choice itself creates this value relationship. Then Mises stressed, was the first one to integrate money into the subjective theory of value established by Karl Menger. Mises argued in particular that Mises solved in particular the problem of the circularity of this explanation as it had been perceived before him. Before him, economists were arguing, well, it is impossible to apply the theory of subjective value to money because the utility of money, subjective value of money, depends on its purchasing power. The more I can buy with a dollar bill, the higher its value also for me. But on the other hand, the purchasing power itself must result, because if I exchange, how is this purchasing power established? Well, by the exchanges that occur on the market. I go into the bakery and I pay $1 for the bread. So this creates purchasing power for this money. How does this purchasing power come into existence? How do money prices come into existence? Well, in the light of subjective values. So we have a circular relationship here. Subjective values explain the purchasing power, but the purchasing power should also explain the subjective values. We are moving in a circle. And Mises explained that it's not really a circle, it's a determination that occurs through time. Right? This is the so-called regression theorem that we will also again discuss this week again, at least 2 or 3 times. And what the regression theorem says is that the subjective value of money is based on the purchasing power that existed the day before or the hour before. That is, on the money prices that have existed in the past, and these money prices have existed in the past came into being in the light of the subjective values of the past. Right? And these subjective values were then formed on the basis of purchasing power that was even older. Right? So you're moving back in time. There's no circle. You're just moving back in time. And Mises also explained that this moving back in time was not unlimited, but had a stopping point. The third point that he stressed, which is at any rate important as compared to current monetary theory, is that money was not neutral. Money is not just a veil. It's not just like the veil that one puts over the face of a bride. It doesn't change anything to the underlying reality. At least that's what the bridegroom hopes. It's just a veil. In the case of money, it's not the same thing. A monetary economy is never exactly equal to a barter economy. And you introduce money into an economy that was before a barter economy, it's never the case that the social relationships and the kinds of things that you produce and the quantities that you produce are exactly the same as before. And that is because money has a value of its own, right? And therefore affects, right, the use of money affects the use of all other goods. Mises explained in particular that the production of money creates, therefore, redistribution between the users of money. The early users are benefited at the expense of the later users. It's also something that we will discuss tomorrow. Finally, Mises introduced a new business cycle theory. A new business cycle theory based on the analysis of fractional reserve banking, that is, on the type of banking that is dominant today. Fractional reserve banks create money substitutes, so today checking accounts out of nothing. And these money substitutes are backed up by base money, which at the time was gold and silver, and which today are Federal Reserve notes. So fractional reserve banks hold only a part of all the checking accounts in the form of base money, so they have only a part of them are backed by base money, so you have a fractional reserve. And this is what, of course, makes banks fragile in the first place. But the possibility of money creation also creates a different problem, one problem that had been overlooked before Mises, namely the possibility of an intertemporal misallocation of resources. Because fractional reserve banks have the possibility to increase the money supply, they can lend out this new money that they create at particularly low interest rates, or artificially low interest rates. And this in turn can induce entrepreneurs to use this money to start all kinds of activities, investment projects that they would not otherwise have started. Now, this seems to be a good thing, but it's not a good thing because from an aggregate point of view, in the economy, we can realize only so and so many investment projects depending on the amount of real resources that are available. And so in order to produce more cars, we need to have all the factors of production that are needed for car making, the steel, the gum, and the labor hours, streets and so on to transport the various items and so on. And so for the completion of investment projects, it is necessary that we are more richly equipped with real factors of production, not just with money. Now, if thanks to the increase of the money supply, we start more investment projects, does not mean that we can therefore finish all the new projects that we have now started. And we are running out of real resources that would be necessary to finish them all. So it comes sooner or later to a crisis. And this too, right, you will hear in more detail during this week. Mises was the first one to articulate this theory, and it was later on refined and developed by various other Austrians, such as Friedrich August von Hayek, Murray Rothbard, and others. The second important book, so there are 4 major works by Mises, right? So don't expect an indefinite list, right? Mises has authored 16 books. And so not all of them are equally important, and all of them are good. But not all of them are equally important, so I'll just present the 4 major works. So the second major work, and maybe as a book, his most splendid production ever, is the book Socialism, which he published in 1922, also first edition in German, Die Gemeinwirtschaft. And here Mises made a great variety of contributions again, so because my time is limited, I will just scratch the surface and highlight 4 contributions that are particularly important. The first one is that Mises demonstrated in more detail a problem that he had highlighted 2 years before in an article dealing with the problem of economic calculation in a socialist Commonwealth. Mises made the following point. Economic rationality, rational investment, is based on cost accounting. That is, it's based on our ability to compare selling proceeds to cost expenditure. We are engaging in an investment project if we believe that our selling receipts will be higher than the amount of money that we have to put on the table now in order to hire people, in order to buy raw materials, set up a building, and so on. So this comparison runs in terms of money prices. And the socialists writing at Mises' day, they believed that obviously a socialist Commonwealth would do exactly the same thing, no big deal. Right? They could calculate just as we would calculate in a market economy, only they would do it much better because the capitalists, of course, they were greedy, right? So they were investing too much. They were incompetent. We get rid of all of this, and they were doing multiplying. So there was lots of waste going on because different entrepreneurs were setting out, producing for the same market, catering for the same market, and therefore putting too many resources in this. We will get rid of all of this and be just as efficient as the capitalists were before because we could use the same tool. Now, Mises demonstrated that that is not possible. And it's not possible because in a socialist economy, by definition, we cannot have market prices for factors of production. Socialism is defined by common ownership of all the means of production. Maybe not labor, it's maybe not as, there's no slave ownership, but even labor is not being exchanged. It's not being, laborers are being assigned to different tasks. Right? So it's close to a slave economy. Right? In any case, there's no exchange of the factors of production. All machines, all trucks, buildings and so on are owned by society as a whole, represented by the government. That's the planning committee. Now, because they own everything, they don't exchange. Right? If I take my $1 million that they pay me here at the Mises Institute out of my right pocket and put it into the left pocket, that's not exchange. Right? So there's no market price. But if there's no market price for factors of production, then it's impossible to confront whatever selling proceeds we might have to factor prices. So we cannot apply the same procedure, the same intellectual procedure that we use in capitalism to the case of a socialist economy. It's impossible. Now, this was a very strong claim, very powerful argument that was discussed in the 20 years that followed. And then eventually the debate ran out of steam. And due to the existence of the Soviet Empire, people came to believe, well, I mean, obviously the socialists, they have solved this one way or another. It's not a big deal. It's not as Mises thought. Well, later on, we have learned how the Soviets have solved this problem. Well, they looked at Western warehouse catalogs. Right? So they were buying the Sears catalog and looking at what cost these things in a market economy. It was a very imperfect way of doing this, but that's how they dealt with it. Yeah, so then interest in Mises' theory awoke again with the collapse of the Soviet Empire, which was a little late for a couple of million people. Okay, the three other major contributions here, I must speed on. Okay, so Mises stressed that all capital goods have a universal destination. They benefit not only their owners, right? The owner of a machine is not the only one who benefits from this, while he gets revenue out of this, but the real services provided by the machine always go to the consumers at large. Right? So ultimately, from a social point of view, in a way, it's irrelevant who owns the machine, because everybody stands to benefit. All consumers stand to benefit from this. Mises stressed that there are incentives for division of labor. And under all settings, human beings always have an incentive to associate, to cooperate within a division of labor. And these economic incentives, therefore, the theory that explains these economic incentives gives rise to a law of association. We can explain why it comes to the formation of societies. Here, Mises was not quite original, right? The same point, by and large, had been stressed also by Plato and St. Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages. But of course, Mises, stressed this point at a time when it had been forgotten. And finally, he developed and refined, precisely stated, monopoly theory. Okay, next, third major book is Human Action. Human Action is Mises' main book. So I said the book Socialism is the most brilliant one as a book. This is one monograph and is sweeping book written at the height of his powers. Human Action, which has the predecessor Nationalökonomie, so this German word there, 1940, was written at the end of his career, maturity, and it was a treatise on economics. That is something that brought together everything that Mises had developed before. All the different building blocks were now integrated into a system and on some points refined and further developed. But the most important aspect of the book is that it is a system. It's easy always to pinpoint a particular contribution and saying, well, that's a great point that had not been made before, but it's also important to deliver a system of thought that allows us, enables us to grasp all of reality, because the real world is one, right? It's not different real worlds according to the different intellectual tools that we use. It's always one world. So we should aspire to have one theory that puts all of the different phenomena in their proper place. So Mises developed this as a system of economic thought. System of economic thought based on a method that Mises called praxeology. That's the logical character of economic science. It's the logic of human action. Praxeology, praxis, action, and logy, so the logic of human action. Mises stressed so that this logic of human action is similar to the general discipline of logic, also of mathematics, in that it does not rely on observations. So we can discuss economic laws without reference to any concrete economic behavior, because it is built on aspects of reality that go beyond observed, what we can observe. For example, take the simple fact of human choice. And human choice is the starting point of all of economic analysis, but we cannot observe choice. Nobody has ever observed a choice. We always can only observe the results of choice. Or take the other, the related, right? The corresponding element of choice is scarcity. And all of economics is about analyzing different aspects of scarcity. But scarcity itself cannot be observed. It's something that you have to understand before you approach the world to make sense out of this world. If you do not understand scarcity, something that you cannot observe, you can never make any sense out of what you observe, the real world. Mises made two points in particular that he had not stressed that much in previous work, namely the function of the entrepreneur. So he developed a theory of entrepreneurship. The entrepreneur is a central actor within the economy. And in that respect, too, he had a predecessor in Joseph Schumpeter, who was also a member of the boehm-bawerk seminar. And but in distinct contrast to Schumpeter, Mises saw the entrepreneur as somebody who brought the economy toward equilibrium. So, precisely that actor that brings the type of things that we produce and the relative quantities that we produce of different goods into just the right proportion as measured by the value judgments of consumers, which is something that Israel Kirzner has stressed after Mises. And he also underlined that capitalism is a rational social order. Professor Salerno has written a very important article on the subject. Mises as a social rationalist, I believe is the title, has appeared about 15 years ago in a review of Austrian Economics, a timeless contribution. And so Mises stressed that capitalism is a rational social order. It's not just chaos. It is it's a true social order, even though there is no central planning. It's a spontaneous social order. And it is rational, so it's not something that occurs despite the aspirations or projects of entrepreneurs, but precisely because it is being planned by a great number of different individuals that cooperate with one another in ever new ways. The final book, and again here, so I'm listing in fact two books, right? The final major contribution, major work, is in the field of methodology and epistemology. So here the major work is Theory and History. It's the one on the left. It's also been recently re-edited. And then a book with the title The Ultimate Foundation of Economic Science. Theory and History has been published in 1957. And The Ultimate Foundation of Economic Science in 1962 is Mises' last work. Theory and History is of a more general nature. Ultimate Foundation of Economic Science focuses on a critique of positivism within the social sciences. It's a sweeping critique of positivism. It's also a splendid book. As far as, sweepiness is concerned, is only comparable to this book on socialism, although it is much smaller. It's just 150 pages. So Mises' point here that he makes is in fact an epistemological case for capitalism. Mises stresses that for any sort of social analysis, human action is an ultimate given. We cannot go beyond human action. We know of some of the factors that influence human action, but we cannot exhaust this. So in different contrast to other later Austrians, such as Murray Rothbard, for example, Mises did not believe, was not sure, didn't say that human actions are free to make their choice, or like Milton Friedman, right, a famous book title, Free to Choose. We are free to choose. Mises said, well, from a philosophical point of view, it's difficult to get around determinism. Probably human actions are completely determined. Maybe there is no such thing as free choice. But, there was this point, we do not know all these factors. We know a few of them. Right? We know that if prices diminish for a good, I have a tendency to buy more of this good. Right? Or to buy it, whereas before I had not bought it. Right? So we can formulate such regularities, but which are always very partial. We never get a complete grasp on all of the factors that determine human action. So from the point of view of social science, human action is an ultimate given. We have to proceed as though, even if it's not, maybe not true, human beings were free to make their choices. And so what we need to do then is to analyze causes and consequences. And there are universal causal relationships, right? And there are contingent causal relationships. There are universal causal relationships which are studied by economic science, right? By praxeology, the logic of human action. And then there are contingent causal relationships which are studied by history. For example, one example would be increases of the money supply. We increase the money supply. As a consequence, the price level will tend to be higher than it otherwise would have been. This is a universal consequence. It holds true at all times and at all places. But then if we turn to the question, why has the money supply been increased? It's difficult to formulate such a universal answer, a universally valid answer. Right? In our day, money supply is being increased by commercial banks, by the central bank. The central bank might increase the money supply for a great variety of reasons, right? To help out the president, or because it seriously believes financial markets are in great difficulties, and so on. Right? So the concrete answer, the concrete cause changes from time to time. And the concrete reactions that this provokes also change from time to time. So we have invariant causes. So this is the right. We have this division. Universals are studied by economics and praxeology, and then contingent facts are studied by history. That's all that there is. Now, various schools of thought try to go beyond this and formulate sweeping causal assertions that go beyond what we can know by observation and what we can know by praxeological reasoning. And this holds true in particular of, here it is screwed up. The three doctrines of Marxism, philosophy of history, and positivism. And all three are based at crucial junctures on claims about things of which we don't have the first knowledge. Marx claims, for example, that productive forces determine the economy, right? So there's something that like a productive force that operates independent of human choice and that shapes the operation of the economy, which is an assertion without foundation. Positivism is based on the hypothesis that we can analyze human action just as we would analyze stones. We can completely determine them. And which is even worse than Marxism in that respect, because we positively know that it's wrong. And in the case of human action, we don't know everything about human choice. There are lots of things that escape us, and therefore we have to treat human action as a starting point. We cannot deal with it as we would deal with stones. Right? So it's all fantasy, it's fiction, it's not science. Science fiction. Right? So the only doctrines that stand up to scientific criteria, to rigorous scientific criteria, are praxeology and true history. And both disciplines vindicate the free market, they vindicate the political claims of liberalism and not of the interventionists. Okay, that was it for tonight. Thank you for your attention.